Welcome, Perminder, and welcome everybody to another episode of Unplugged with the Jas Oberoi Group. Today we have a very special guest who's not just a guest, but also a friend and someone that we work very closely with. So glad to have you. Come on here. Perminder, he is a partner at Lindsay Kenny. He's a lawyer. He's been a lawyer for a long time. But I'm actually going to let you maybe do your intro so you can tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love that you guys are out there having conversations with people, putting out a lot of great content for the community. So way to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a partner at LK Law. I'm a lawyer. It feels like these days, after practicing for these many years, I'm more like half of my day is business development, managing clients, taking phone calls of people's legal problems and making sure that I get the right lawyer involved, right professional, right specialist. So a lot of what I describe of what I do is I'm a quarterback, right? A lot of my clients call and say, Perminder, I've got this problem. Is this something you do? Who do you trust? Who can you put in charge of this? And then I'll make sure I'm overseeing their matter. So there's a lot of that, and that's a lot of different areas of the law: real estate development, family law, estates, estate litigation, inheritance claims, all the stuff you see that I'm commenting about online to make sure people understand their rights. And then a lot of my work is as an inheritance claims lawyer, so representing people that have been disinherited from their family estates. So a lot of estate litigation, and it's a very busy area because a transition to wealth is happening. The baby boomers are starting to slowly pass away, and there's a lot of movement of assets over to the next generation, and it's resulting in a lot of conflict.
Yeah, well, of course, it's sad that they're going through that, but it is important to have somebody on your side that knows what they're doing, right? And that's well established in the industry as well. You primarily work out of which area?
Yeah, so geographically, the firm has 3 offices. We're in downtown Vancouver, in Langley, and we just opened a West Vancouver office, so we have 3 offices.
Very nice, okay. And you work out of all 3 of them?
Me, I'm predominantly a Fraser Valley guy, grew up in Surrey, so I'm predominantly out of the Langley office, but if a client needs to meet in the Vancouver office or West Vancouver office, always make it happen. Got to get down there. It's my business. I'm a partner.
Of course.
So there's associates, my other partners. I go meet, have team meetings, right? Strategy sessions. A client wants me involved in a meeting. I have to go downtown. So just like any other professional, running around.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Whatever the business needs, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Today, I really wanted to focus on family trusts. A lot of our viewers, that's what they've shown interest in. I know that you were supposed to come on as one of our, panelists for a seminar, but last minute, very fortunately, you were awarded a Jubilee Award. Am I saying that correct?
It was the King Charles III Coronation Award.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the right way of saying it.
The Jubilee's pretty special. Hopefully I'll shoot for the Jubilee next.
You will. I'm sure you will. Yeah. How was that?
It was good. Yeah, I got to go to Victoria, the Parliament buildings. It was pretty special. I got to take my mom with me. I regretted missing the event. I heard it was really well attended, over 100 people. And I'm glad that I was able to send one of my partners there and engage with your audience. But yeah, it was a cool little recognition, more of the community service stuff that I do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And also the people that are watching that, also couldn't come to the seminar because the seminar sold out very fast. So, this would be a great podcast for those of you that are interested in real estate or any sort of like investment, and you're looking into, maybe making the next steps, which is I'm hoping you have like trust in place. And if you don't, this podcast is going to be a very important one that you would want to watch. Perminder's full of knowledge. So today we're going to pick your brain. We're going to ask you everything and anything to do with family trusts. But I want you to start, tell us for those people that are watching, what is a family trust?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the first points I like making for people is, if they think a topic doesn't hit home with them, they kind of tune out, right? And when you hear the word trust, they start to think about the pop culture reference of the trust fund kids in movies and TV shows. So they think it's really something for just rich people, right? And that's absolutely not true. It's a vehicle and tool that can be used for many, many different reasons, right? So the first point people should be thinking about is, actually, that's a tool that might apply to my family situation, right? The 2 most basic things to think about is there's trusts that get created upon death, and that's known as a testamentary trust. And then there's ones that you can create while you're alive, and that's an inter vivos or living trust. So you can create 2 different kind. And the analogy that I often use for people to understand it is, imagine a big delivery truck, okay? There's 3 components to a trust. There's a grantor, there's a trustee, and then there's the assets in the trust, right? So if you think of a delivery truck, you've got the person that has said all the assets are into the trunk of the big semi-truck, okay? Into the big cabin. Those are the assets. They need to move. The grantor is the one saying, I am directing these things to go somewhere from one person to another, okay? And then there's the trustee, the person who sets all the rules and makes sure that this thing is delivered on time to these people and under the following conditions, right? So it's moving assets from one place or person to another. And the things that that are often driving that are tax, right? Creditor protection, so protecting your assets from banks and other places. You can use it for certain marriage arrangements. You know the example sometimes, and I've heard this lately, where a family is going through a marriage, a recent marriage is happening. Son or daughter might have significant assets from the family, and the family wants to gift a home or something like that. But then they worry that gifting a home to this young couple, what if they divorce?
Yep.
And what's going to happen there? One option that you have is to put the home into a trust, right? So it's not actually owned by those two people, but it's owned by the trust, and the future beneficiaries of it, you get to define who those people are. And it could actually live on for a long time. That's the difference between setting one up while you're living and one up when you pass. You get to set these conditions up, right? Is it revocable? Is it irrevocable, right? Meaning revocable is one that you can shift and change while you're alive. Irrevocable means one that is set and never changes. And we can use examples as we talk with each other, people will go, oh, actually, that might apply to my life. But that's the basic setup. Assets going from one place to another. There's someone who sets it up, the grantor or the settlor, right? And then there's a trustee, someone who's responsible for setting all the rules and conditions and making sure that the assets go where they need to go.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
And I like the fact that you said, when people think of trust, they think, trust fund, right? Like, somebody who has a lot of money, they're the only ones that need to have a trust in place. Whereas that's not true, right? At what point do you think that people need to start thinking, you know what, I need a trust? Or maybe this is the conversation that we need to start having about trust, right?
Yeah. So really it's a question of what assets do we have? So I think a first condition is, do we have assets? Right? I suppose you could even say it for just a car. It's complicated and it'll be expensive to set it up for that. But if you have assets that you want to go to someone, the first question you have is a trust an appropriate mechanism for that, right? It may or may not be, but you want to talk to a lawyer, probably an accountant, and have that conversation, because it can be more not as simple as I want it to go to my wife. You may want it to go actually to your children or your spouse, skip a person, right? One that I often think about when it comes to real estate, because a lot of your audience might be realtors, landlords, purchasers of real estate, there's the word bare trust that we hear a lot about, right? And people think that might be actually a trust, because it is. You're writing a document that says this asset is actually in the name of someone else for now, but there's beneficiaries who are the real owners of this property, right? The intended beneficiaries of it. The law is going through some recent changes now when it comes to bare trusts and the rules around transparency and having to disclose who the actual beneficiary is. So the law in this area is right at the top now of being changed. And the government wants to know who the beneficiaries are. So we're kind of moving away from an era and a time where you could put bare trusts. Notoriously, I knew people were backdating these things and, trying to come up with creative and strategic ways, right?
Yeah.
But it's essentially a document that says, I actually own this, but the owner on title is somebody else right now, right?
Yeah.
So an intended beneficiary is somebody else.
Yeah, I've seen that happen in real estate a lot. On paper, like you said, one person is the owner, and then in the back end, they have their own, agreement that goes on, right?
So that's just like a trust,
Yes,
right? There's
exactly.
something created back there of who actually is going to get this thing.
Yeah,
and what
I
is
didn't
the
know that
vehicle.
people were backdating them too.
Yeah, well, you would hear about those stories because
okay. Yeah.
They're trying to avoid certain rules and things like that, right? It's not legal, it's not appropriate.
Of course.
But the government's catching up to all of that stuff, and they want to know who are the intended beneficiaries of these things, because people were trying to skirt tax, right? That's the main thing that was happening, right? And a lot of, let's say, fraud and or all this foreign investor rule stuff, right? That was what this really came down to.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And so would you say that when you're, let's say, a lot of people are watching us, they're either investors or they own already like one home at least, right? So for those people, and they don't have a trust in place right now, right? And they're thinking about it, would you say that that is the right time for them to start thinking about it with one property that they have?
Yeah. So, why don't I give you an example of a personal example,
Yeah.
my own. So, let's say you have your one home, your family is in there, and you got your kids in there, and you're starting to do some of your planning, you're making a will, or you already have a will, and the kids are not the age of majority. So let's say they're 9, 10, 11 years old, okay? And your concern, and my concern, is my wife and I travel a lot without the kids, okay? And let's say we're out on one of our epic hikes somewhere, Utah, and we both get attacked by a bear or something like that. We both die. And, what we had to think about was, if we were to pass while we're away and the kids are under 19, what happens to them? What happens to our family home? Because without trusts, you actually have to have the home is deemed to be disposed and needs to go to whoever is the next owner, right?
Of course.
So a testamentary trust, an example of a trust, is one that we created in our will that says at a certain age, our kids will get access to the family wealth. But up until that point, so let's say, for example, we say at 25, they will get 50% of the family estate, both kids.
Okay.
But up to age 25, we want the family home to go into a trust.
Okay.
We want their education to be paid for, their living expenses to be paid for. So what happens is the will says, upon my death, a trust is to be created, administered by the trustee, who's going to move our investments and our assets into a trust. The trust will hopefully continue to earn income because there'll be stock, there'll be maybe insurance products, there'll be cash, there'll be a real estate. Don't sell it. It's going to go into a trust, and that the income generated is going to take care of the children, and especially the family home. We want them to have access to and live in the family home. Family home goes into a trust, and all the payments and mortgage payments and expenses get paid through the trust, and the kids get to stay in their family home.
Of course. Now let's talk about, you didn't have that family trust in place, right? That's not in your will. Like, do this, do that, right? Let's say there's no planning. For those for those people that are watching and they have no plan, right? What would happen in that case?
Why don't I say this? It's a very simple one. You have no plan, no will. It's going to be very complicated, and it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be stressful for the family and the kids. So
Of course.
it's called dying intestate. There's rules that the government, creates through legislation about how it will be monitored and managed, and who it goes to and flows to. Yeah, those rules are there. It doesn't just end up in the hands of the government. But the thing that's stressful is the time for the kids, the family members and people who are going to try to step up, right? Guardianship. You put your guardians in your will, right? You list who's going to take care of the kids, right? And if you don't have that, then the question all becomes upon family members, who's supposed to do this?
Yeah.
You got to have these conversations before these things happen. Make sure that people know that they're going to be the guardians of your children if that happens.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
I recently had a friend of mine who's telling me, her friend, he went to bed, like, he's very young, very fit. He's in his 30s. He went to bed and then he just didn't wake up the next morning.
I think I heard the same story. Might be the same person we're
Yeah,
thinking about.
and his wife was just like waking him up and nothing, right? Like, he wasn't sick, nothing was happening. And she was telling me at that point is the first time that she realized, hey, you know what? I need a will. I need to decide like what happens, because she just had a baby girl. I need to decide what's going to happen to her. What if my husband and I were not alive? Like, what happens? Who takes care of her? What's going to happen to all the assets that they have, right? Like, and she's just like, a few months old. Like, who's going to take care of all? She's, you know what I mean? Like, the last thing that you want your family to worry about, obviously, God forbid any of this happens. But again, like, the planning, that is going to help your family so much with the headache as well, right? So these type of tools, I feel like a lot of people, they don't think about it because they think, oh, nothing will happen. You're young, everything is fine. But like that family, right? Like, he just didn't wake up the next morning.
Yeah, check this out. So I've been getting called on to a lot of the podcasts and to speak and go to these engagements on this topic. So it's top of mind for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so the phone calls and consultations are like, I'm super busy. And I'll share with you some of the interesting conversations we're having. When we get to the stage of asking about guardians, I'm talking to a husband and wife. We might be on a Zoom, right? We're having great conversation. They enjoyed filling out our forms and they're all happy because they're planning. And then they have a couple kids and I say, so who do you want to be the guardian of the children if you were to pass, like, before they turn 19, right? What would you want? And they sort of look at each other and go, well, I kind of think my brother, and she'll go, well, I think my sister, and they haven't had the conversation yet. And it's fun to watch that and help them chat with each other. And often it's you guys should start this conversation. I know you're doing it right now in front of me, but have it over a cup of tea, have a glass of wine, talk about it over the weekend, and we'll talk it through with you next week of what you agree on. There's usually a primary and an alternate, right? And you just help them have these discussions, but such important discussions for people to have. And another thing is, so let's say I meet with them next week and they tell me we decided on her sister, the wife's sister, right? I always tell them, this is something you always revisit at least every couple of years. And they get a letter from us automatically from our office that says, have you gained any more assets? Have your circumstances changed at all? Have you considered who your guardian is and if your mind has changed at all, right? So just rethinking about these things.
Of course, yeah. And
right?
how often do you think people should go and revisit their will?
I would say the best answer to that is if you keep it on the top of your mind. I actually sit down at the start of the year, every year in January, and just reflect a little bit on my circumstances. So I think about it in January every year about what is the state of my affairs, I guess because I practice in this area. But do I really take concrete steps to change things? I'd say every 2 to 3 is when I'm really setting up meetings with my own financial planner, my insurance professional, my accountant, and sitting down and bringing everyone into a room and saying, okay, here's the current picture, how things have changed, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on further planning?
Of course.
So we talked about the guardian, right? Guardian of children. The executor is another person in a will that you designate. Do you know what an executor is? What would you guess an executor is if you had to guess? So if you have a will and it says that my executor is my sister. Right?
Probably the one that takes initiative to start.
Yeah. They're the one responsible for administering everything. So needs to think about, am I going to go to all the banks and go to all
I guess for executor, the one who actually sells the property and all of that. Oh, God.
In charge of collecting everybody, advising the professionals, going to the banks, and administering the whole estate, getting lists ready, passwords, like managing the whole estate, right?
Okay.
So when you talk to people about that same thing, who do you think the executor should be? In a typical marriage, it's a mirror situation. So the husband would set his wife as the executor if he were to pass first. But then they need to talk about if they were both to pass, who would they want as their executor?
Got it. Makes sense, yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility. There is compensation for that job. You can set it in the will. Usually it's an hourly rate for their services or sometimes a small percentage of the estate. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. But again,
of course,
having the conversation about who the guardian is, having a conversation with the executor, hey, you're my executor. And it's funny, I'm the executor for so many of my friends. Whenever they travel, I'll get like a text message, right, saying, hey, executor, just so you know, we're taking a trip, me and the wife are together, just in case something happens, be aware.
Yeah,
right?
it's on you.
I've done the same thing to my executor. I'm like, okay, hey, just in case something happens, is letting you know. It's kind of funny, but you just never know what might happen.
Yeah, and it's good to be prepared too and give like a little bit of a heads up to people too.
Yeah.
Also just wanted to talk for people who already own, let's say they own a few properties and they don't have a will, they don't have a trust, they have nothing, right? What's like the first step? Like what should they doing in terms of planning?
Yeah, great question. So the example you just gave is an individual that has probably their primary residence, a couple rental properties. They're working away. They've just never done any planning. Married, unmarried, kids, no kids, but they've got real estate. And they do need to think about, in the event they pass, what happens is this. So the rules around in our country, many countries on the world are, when you die, all the things you own are considered sold that day. So one thing for you to think about is, you pass, that day it's called a deemed disposition. So it's considered sold on the date of death. When it's sold, it has to go somewhere. So this is the conversation you should be having with yourself and your professionals. Where do you want that thing to go, right? And the first person I often think about is my accountant, right? How can I structure title to these assets such that it's done in a tax efficient way? We talked about trusts. If it goes into a trust, there's certain tax treatment that trusts actually have. If it's a principal residence or investment property where there's someone else on title, there's 2 types of ways you can own real estate. There's tenants in common and joint tenants with a right of survivorship. With a joint tenancy with a right of survivorship, by definition, The survivor is the person who gets that asset.
Yeah.
So you can actually avoid probate taxes, right? And just have the asset go to the surviving person. Of course, there's pros and cons to things.
Yeah.
The con might be that it actually goes to someone fully who you didn't want it fully to go to.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
That's like it could be a partner just for the investment. It's not your family member that you want it to go to.
You got it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So tenants in common
Yeah.
is where, say it was a partner 50-50.
Yeah.
Tenants in common, 50% is going to go to that person's estate and the other 50 goes to the other person.
Yeah.
And I am so shocked how much real estate is set up in this province.
Of course.
Not the way the people intended.
I
and
know.
they had no idea.
Yeah. Because you know what it is? Like when you go to the lawyers to sign, they ask you, oh, which one, and you just decide like at that moment. But I think a lot of people, like they don't actually think it through. Like, okay,
Yeah, you're right.
This is why we need to do it. And like, there's a lot of lawyers that actually won't tell people, like, hey, this is what the difference is, right? If you were to pass away, this automatically goes to the other person on title.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other, case, that doesn't happen, right? So I think a lot of people, they're just not aware of it. And maybe they're under so much stress when they're doing their title. They're like, okay, it's fine. Like, we'll worry about it in the future.
Yeah, I think that's more what it is. I would think most lawyers, they're professionals. They're going to do their best to explain it. But for people who don't think about these things,
of course, yeah.
both of them sound maybe right.
Yeah, they both sound like, and at that time when you're purchasing a property, you're not thinking of like death. You're not thinking of any of that.
Actually, you're so excited to buy it.
Yeah.
It's closing day.
100%. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So you're excited about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And those are the things people should be thinking about is, are my title designations correct?
Of course.
And oh my God, there's another one that comes up all the time.
Yeah.
People who are investors together and they put one person on title, but there's all these other people that invested into that purchase but never put themselves on title,
So what
nor
happens?
did they sign a contract of their...
Like no bare trust, nothing.
This is called litigation, right? Property
Yeah.
litigation. The one person scoops up the opportunity, takes all the money,
Of course.
and then others come into our office saying, here's the draft I gave the person for $200,000.
Yeah.
The other person then says, the one who has the property, that wasn't investment, and that wasn't equity, that was a loan.
Yeah.
You don't share in the lift, and there's all this litigation around, right?
Yeah.
What were you? Were you partners, not partners?
Yeah.
Was it a loan, not a loan?
Yeah.
Right?
So let's say, I have an investment property, right? And I have no planning around it, right? And, I have partners, on the property as well. And tomorrow, let's say I die, right? What happens to that property? Like you said that, the day that you die, right? That's the sale date.
Deemed
Right?
disposition.
Yes.
So right away, how awful is that if it's that one person on title with all these other investors
Yeah.
and it wasn't the right time to sell?
Yes. So let's say what happens then.
It's going to depend on the person who had their name on title.
Yeah.
Do they have a will or not have a will?
Let's say they don't have a will.
So then are they married, not married? You have to go
Just-
through this
just
analysis,
partners, yeah.
right? But like the person,
Of course.
the one
Yeah.
on title,
Yeah.
if they have a spouse and they had no will, it's going to go to the spouse. And if there's children, you flow through this analysis, right, that the
Yeah.
government has set up of who gets it.
Yeah.
But it's basically that one person's line,
Of course.
their estate,
Yeah.
that's going to benefit the most. And these other investors
Yeah.
are going to have to then probably sue
Yeah.
the estate.
Of course.
They'll be suing the estate.
They'll be suing the state. Okay,
Right? Not
wow.
even that person's gone that they
Yeah,
were partners
of
with.
course, yeah.
And the family's going to say, he never told us that he had partners,
Yeah.
right? From our position, that was his.
I know. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And let's also talk about probate fees, right? And, for those of you that don't know, right, let's touch base on that as well.
Yeah. Great,
Yeah.
great question. Great topic. So in general, we talked about assets flowing to people, okay? And the next beneficial owner. When the asset has to flow through court to be stamped to go to the next beneficial owner, that's called probate.
Yeah.
At that time, the government takes their, on average, 1.5% fee for administering the estate. So assets that have people on title that need to go to the next beneficiary, if it has to flow through court and probate, there's a fee. But there's a bunch of assets that you can designate in certain ways where they don't have to go through probate. So this is the hiring the lawyer, the accountant, getting the professionals involved. And I can give you examples. So
Yes.
what people might be listening to this and wanting to be thinking about is, how do I save that 1.5% fee?
Yeah.
How do I avoid the cost and expense of court? How can I make it easier on my executor and my children to receive the fruits of all the labor, right? And so you have to think about how you can hold title to these various things. And this isn't always the perfect formula for people because there's pros and cons to everything. That's why you need a professional.
Yeah.
Let's start with real estate. We talked about it a little already. If it's a joint tenant with right of survivor, all you need to do is show that you're the survivor and the land title will put it in your name. Okay, so you don't even need to go through probate there.
Yeah.
So there's one piece of property that goes not through probate. You save the fee. It goes very easily, not time consuming, cheap. All the benefits are there.
Yeah.
The only risk is it going to the right person, right? So making sure that that person's the right person. Let's talk about life insurance, another asset you might have. If you put a designated beneficiary on your life insurance, the life insurance company, Manulife, Sun Life, whoever it might be, looks at the policy, designated beneficiary, 2 children, 50-50. They just cut the check straight to the 2 kids. It doesn't go through probate. If it's no designated beneficiary on the life insurance policy, it has to go through probate, right? Because it'll just say in this person's name, no one's listed as who it goes to. What does the will say? Will says the children. Oh, needs to go through probate before it gets to the children, right?
Yeah.
So there's your life insurance. Now let's talk about bank accounts. Very common one. So you're at RBC, right? And the bank says what? Husband and wife on it, right? Sometimes, and here's the problem where it just says husband. Okay. So Perminder Tung is on title to this account. It's not a joint account. It's just Perminder Tung that's the owner of the account. Perminder passes. My wife won't have access to the account. She walks into the bank. They're going to say, sorry, Mandeep, this is just in Perminder's name, right? You need to take that account through probate, get the court to say that you're the rightful beneficiary according to the will. But if it said Perminder and Mandeep Tung, she can walk into the bank and say, I'm a joint owner. Give me everything out of there. I need to go pay for the things in relation to the kids because he just passed. So ease, right? And convenience. Safety deposit boxes.
Yeah.
Another one in our community.
Yes.
Right? You have jewelry, gold, all this stuff in
Yeah.
there. Sometimes it's one person's name on the safety deposit box. And then they pass and the spouse goes into the bank and says, can I get access? Here's the key. And they'll say, it's only in your husband's name. He's gone now. Sorry, miss. You're not an owner of the safety deposit box.
I didn't even think of that.
All these little things.
Because we think of the real estate, we think of the life insurance, everything else. But yeah, you're right.
Bank accounts, right?
yeah.
So having them set up as joint, if you want that. Remember, there's pros here. It's joint. It's fast. It's quick. The person can go in.
Yeah.
What's the risk?
Yeah.
You have someone on
make
title
sure.
to a bank that that you don't want to have the money
Of course, yeah.
because they can walk in and take it.
But
right?
Perminder, if it's on your will, let's say, for example, you don't want it to go to your wife. Okay, you want it to go to your kids. Does it still have to go through probate?
So it depends, right?
if they're the beneficiary?
If they're the beneficiary and
Okay.
if they're the one on title to it.
Okay.
You know, it's as simple as this. The examples we're using are too easy because it's husband,
course.
wife. Of course, you're going to probably want to give everything to your wife. But let's say it's a situation where it's parent with children.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll use my personal example again. My father passed a year ago, lived a great life, 75-year-old man, Kulwantong, amazing, right? Guy, lived a great life. What we have now is mom and my brother and I are now joint on an account with mom, right?
Yeah.
Because we wanted it to be easy such that we don't have to take that through probate if we have to, right?
100%.
In case my brother and I needed to get access to it for her. It's easy for her too. She wanted to do these things. But the risk is you also have 2 sons now who could walk in any day that they want on their own and say, give it all to me.
Of course.
I could do it. My brother could do it. So the risk is one of us does that, right? We've had conversations. You shouldn't do this. Don't do this. This is
Yeah.
mom's. Let's use another example of a parent with 1 child that they put on the joint bank account, but they have 3 others just because that's the kid that takes them to the bank and takes them to the medical appointments. Classic example.
Yeah.
They're always there with grandma, grandpa, and just whatever,
Yeah.
or a grandchild,
Yeah.
right? So they put themselves on there just to make it easy to sign.
Yeah.
But that one person has access because they're joined on the account.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
That's true. Yeah.
joint accounts. So we talked about joint tenants on real estate. We talked about designated beneficiaries for life insurance. Now we're at the bank stage, and now we're talking about who is the person that's on title to the bank. There's a safety deposit box. What does that mean to people?
Yeah.
These are the things we see that is often litigated about, right? The jewelry, someone went and emptied the safety deposit box, right? Because their name was on it and others didn't have access. They don't know, right? That kind of stuff. So hopefully these are basic examples that your audience can, relate to.
Yeah.
Right.
And also like a good, tool to also like add into their planning as well, right? Because a lot of times, like, we get so caught up in like building the wealth that we forget about protecting it as well, right? And, you work hard. Like, we were just talking about the amount of taxes we pay, everything that, we do when we're working hard. So, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it does get passed on properly as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Another example that we didn't talk about and I like raising is these trusts. Say you had a child that had a disability. Imagine a situation where you're worried about that person, them being able to take care of themselves for a longer period of time and not have to stress about money. This is a perfect example where you can create like a trust that manages the funds that you want to flow to the person with a disability. And to really bring it home is, depending on the disability, they might qualify for a bunch of government benefits, okay? And those thresholds are really important of how much income they earn before they qualify for certain benefits with the government. If they come into a lot of money, they may become disqualified for those government benefits. So creating a trust that has some discretionary components to it, where you can drip down the income in a way where they still stay qualified for their government benefits, huge benefit for people.
Of course, yeah.
And so many people might be raising their kids in a way that they're just trying to, keep food on the table, grow their assets, and they're just living day to day. They've got a child or two with disability, and they're just making things work and trying to make ends work. But you can also create these tools to help in the event that they're gone.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. There was a question actually I was thinking of asking you. If, let's say, you have purchased properties under holding companies, right? At this time, are you able to, can you pass that on to your kids as well under a trust?
Yeah, great. Okay. So another great example. So
Yeah.
Now we're getting into complex estate planning.
Yeah.
So when you have these investments that are in corporations, you might have professionals, law corporations, professional corporations for accountants, real estate corporations, so the realtors out there that might be using their PREC and other investment vehicles and holding companies to hold their assets. So on death, this is where a two-will recommendation may come up, meaning they may want a corporate will, right? And a corporate will designates the shares of a company to the person they're intending for them to go to. Otherwise, that corporation's shares would have to flow through probate. So creating the will helps set the circumstances where the shares can flow to the next person. Now, this is really good succession planning for people who may have operating businesses, right? Imagine, construction company, tile company, drywall company, so many people that are running businesses, pizza shop, whatever it might be. A successful business, right, that you want actually to transition over to the next generation. Really powerful opportunity to avoid probate fees and hand over ownership, right, of shares that leave control with the right person to continue running the company. Because again, you want to avoid the team disposition and sale, right?
Oh man, yeah. I didn't even think of that. That's so true, especially for operating companies. Well, thank you so much, Perminder, for coming on today. I know I got to learn a lot of things that I didn't know, and I would think I would know everything being in real estate. So I really appreciate you. And I know that Perminder is on social media. So for those of you that are watching and you want to watch content like this, be sure to check out Perminder. And any services that you need help with, Perminder's there for you. Other than that, thank you so much for watching our podcast. Be sure to check us out on Spotify and on YouTube. We are producing a lot of our YouTube content right now. So do make sure you check it out, like, subscribe, all of our social media. And if you want to see any other topics covered like today's, be sure to put the comment down in our YouTube channel. Until then, we'll see you. Bye.